The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
What's happening, friends? Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, a hoop-ball.com presentation. I am feeling spry. I am Dan Bespris. A minor league baseball homestand is over, which means I am jam-packed with energy, and that, by the way, is why we're doing the show a day later in the week than usual. And he, the man you're about to hear from, the legend himself, the man who makes miracles happen. If I could speak properly, that would have gone really well. Vince, Vince, what's going on, buddy? I haven't talked to you in a while.
What's up? You know, you saying let's make miracles happen, or he makes miracles happen, or whatever. I swear to you on this. When I was in the 8th grade and I was running for class president, 7th grade, running for class president, that was my slogan. Let's make miracles happen.
So what miracles do 7th graders really want to see? Isn't it usually just about better candy in the vending machine?
No, we didn't have vending. Oh, actually did, but they were like Gushers and stuff. Like they took out sodas and
Gushers.
That was Powerades. But no, what they really wanted and they absolutely needed was the more mozzarella stick days on Mondays and on Thursdays.
I am, as we've expressed on this podcast before, not particularly tolerant of lactose product. So what you're saying right now is fully upsetting to me, and I'm sorry, Vince. You do not get 7th grade Dan's vote for class president. I didn't know you were a class president. Did you win?
You know, for this podcast, I'm going to say yes, but
yeah, you did.
No.
You damn underachiever. So this is Fantasy NBA Today. Apologies to anybody listening to the two of us BSing here to start the show. I do want to get into some basketball, Vince. The NBA Summer League wrapped up a few days ago. I didn't have any strong thoughts about it. For me, you know, a Lakers guy, we've talked about that. I'm from LA. It was kind of cool to watch Brandon Ingram play a little bit. It was pretty cool, actually, to watch.
For a little bit.
Yeah, you know, youth struggles. I just liked seeing him move around. D'Angelo Russell looked great during Summer League ball. But again, did it matter, Vince? Did any of it matter?
Does any of it matter? Well, I mean, what a transition. You said, let's talk about some NBA basketball, and you went straight to the Summer League.
Well, technically they're NBA guys, right?
No, I get you. You know, does any of it matter? Yeah. I mean, it's always good to see these young players that come out of this draft, or even second-year players, the improvement that they've made. I think when we talked about it off air right before we started when we were doing the pre-production meeting, is just that, you know, when I'm looking at Summer League, I don't overhype someone because of how well someone's playing. Aaron and I discuss about Ben Simmons' passes, and, you know, I completely agree with the things that he said already in the media. Is just that, you know, those passes are wide open passes. So if you leave your guy open, Ben Simmons can make that pass. And yeah, what you do see from those wide open passes, though, is that he is reading the defense. He is finding the open man. But I think it's a lot harder when you get to that next level, because I mean, if you also look at the assist numbers he had, look at the next tally over on the stat sheet. I mean, he matched, I think he had 8 assists in one game and matched that with 6 turnovers or 7 turnovers. So I mean, you're going to see the inefficiencies there. Like I said, I don't overhype anybody, and I don't, you know, underestimate anyone because of Summer League by any means. But I will say this: the final game in Summer League was definitely fun to watch, to see the back and forth of Denzel Valentine and Tyrus Jones from the Timberwolves team, and the jumpers they were pulling off to win the game, and Denzel Valentine hitting the winner in overtime was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Good to see a little basketball, right? That's, I mean, we're in withdrawals already. You finally get to watch a good ball game.
Yeah, you went from the start of Summer League of basically watching a high-end 24-hour fitness basketball game to the end of Summer League, where you're seeing the 24-hour league players play, but now they're playing within a system because they've been coached throughout the entire Summer League, and you're actually seeing maybe a very bad D-League team playing against another really bad D-League team.
Outstanding. That's good stuff right there. Makes me want to watch it over and over again. Well, you know, what I'm gathering from what you're saying right there is it doesn't really change much for you. you and I had discussed on this podcast in weeks past that Ben Simmons, for me, is someone else's headache. For you, he's a guy that maybe you pick him up and then try to spin him a month or two into the season. Did any of that change for you?
No, I think his hype just went up even more. And I think like if you wanted to get someone who maybe is a round or two higher than Ben Simmons and somehow he slipped, I really do think that he's going to be an asset to have in the beginning of the season. I don't think he's one of those players that you want to keep on your roster. I don't think when you draft him, he's going to be a player that's automatically going to help your team by any means. I think the turnovers are going to be a problem. You brought a field goal percentage, seeing after this. I think that's still going to be an issue going into the next level. But the name, the fact that he is going to be that number one option for that Sixers team, I really do think that he could be someone that just because of name alone and what he does for his team will draw a lot of interest from a lot of other members in your league. And again, you know your league better than we do, but from some of the leagues that I'm in, I know his name is starting to draw up conversation because of this.
So, Vince, I know that we talked before going on air. You've got friends nearby in this show today. I do want to segue from Summer League talk to looking at some of the other teams around the league. We had started to, on our last show, talk a little bit about the Pacific Division, and so it feels only natural that we would move from there to the Northwest. So we'll kind of open things up with, we've got the Thunder we've talked a little bit about already on the show, the Blazers, the Jazz, the Nuggets, and the Timberwolves, and we'll just blast through them one by one on this program and talk a little bit about what they've done so far in the offseason. So without further ado, I think maybe we open up by kind of rehashing a little bit what we've talked about on the Oklahoma City Club. Large-scale changes for them. But I don't know. Nothing's really changed for me lately. Doesn't it still feel like you've got a guy in Russell Westbrook that, unless he's traded before the season, is a top 2 pick? You've got an Oladipo who's probably a top 4 round guy, and then a whole lot of question marks?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only real news that you have now from Oklahoma City is more just rumors. I don't think anybody's value has changed. We've hit on this team quite a bit, especially during the Durant episode. So I don't think we need to hit on them too much. But I do want to bring up a rumor that came up in your thoughts on this, Dan, because we talked about the Rudy Gay 3-team deal. I believe we talked about that on last week's show. But now the new one about the Clippers, or about how the Thunder are targeting Blake Griffin for free agency, and they want to try and pair Russell Westbrook and Blake Griffin together. And you're hearing rumors that the Thunder aren't needing a guaranteed answer right now from Westbrook going into the season that he's going to be there, so he's not necessarily on the trade market. What are your kind of thoughts on Blake Griffin the Thunder trying to team up Blake Griffin with Russell Westbrook?
I think it's posturing. I think Oklahoma City's trying to do enough right now to, whether or not they want to admit it, convince Russell Westbrook that could still be a destination, and I don't believe any of it until something actually comes to fruition. What could the Thunder give the Clippers, Vince, that would make this even remotely feasible?
It's not even through a trade. They're waiting for next year's free agency class.
See, so now you're talking about a situation where they would, in that case, not try to get anything for Russell Westbrook. I mean, that's rolling the dice in a huge way if they're not getting a guarantee. I think that this is rumors being planted. That's
exactly
fine.
I think it is.
That's fine. It's a good move. It's a shrewd marketing move to try to convince your own players that where they're staying right now could potentially be a destination again. But it feels like a plant more than anything else.
Yeah, it feels like Oklahoma City is just like, media guys, let kind of just spill out there that we're targeting Blake Griffin so that Russell Westbrook knows we have a plan for his team next season. Basically just trying to incentivize Westbrook to, come on, sign an extension here. Don't leave us, because that's what they want. You can't lose Westbrook.
No, I don't think it's going to work. I mean, assuming that Westbrook has people around him that have some knowledge of how media spin works, and teams sort of using their own mouthpieces, beat writers, whatever it may be, to get these rumors out. I don't see that impacting things at all. I think I'm not even going to say a little bit. I think it's a zero impact rumor. And I think it's a load of fluff. One question. I will
say this: that would be super fun to watch in the following season.
Yes, it would.
That would be one of the most entertaining teams, just because they're both so athletic.
Yeah, you might be watching it. You just might be watching it on a different team. What your thoughts on one other player on Oklahoma City, Vince? Largely, I guess I'd say the big man trio more than any one player, because we can all talk about Westbrook, we can all talk about Oladipo. Those are the big name guys on this club. But Steven Adams, Enes Kanter, Ersan Ilyasova, that trio is basically, for now at least, and things may change, going to be splitting the 96 minutes between center and power forward. There's not much else around. They've got a young Sabonis who might see a couple of minutes here and there. They might play someone like a Kyle Singler as a stretch four, I guess, every once in a while. But those are short-term solutions. You're going to see those three bigger guys log most of the minutes. So do any of them, for you, Vince, creep up onto your draft board, or are you waiting it out? Because we saw Adams and Kanter actually put up some decent numbers this last year.
I'm really looking at Kanter now that he's going to be a starter for the Thunder and seeing what numbers he can produce as a starter, not as a sixth man off the bench. Because, I mean, even in his limited role, he was putting up late-round value for most players or for most teams. So I'm really intrigued by Kanter, and I'm really interested. And I might take the wait-and-see approach on Adams, because Adams was a waiver guy at times throughout last season, and ad dropped a lot. But he showed a lot of promise during that postseason and was a huge factor for that team. And now maybe they look at him a little bit more as that third option for the team. I don't really know what they're going to do out there, because you just really know it's Westbrook and Oladipo's team, and after that it's kind of a fill in where you can.
Yeah, the thing
situation.
The thing I like about that trio is that last year, where Adams and Kanter were kind of splitting the same bucket of minutes, where Serge Ibaka was chewing up most of the power forward spot, those two guys don't necessarily have to share the same 48 minutes this year. You could have a game where Ersan Ilyasova is sort of the odd man out. Adams and Kanter play 35 minutes apiece, and each of them could actually be productive on that night. So I've got them both targeted as late-round guys for me in the draft. Ilyasova is, to me, the odd man out. He's a good floor spacer, which could be interesting, but he's more of a pickup for me when we're looking at it right now.
He'll have that week.
Yep, he always does.
He always has. Ghostface Illy has that week where you're like, why can't he do this consistently? Like, he'll be a top 50 player, top 75 player, and then he just completely drops off the face of the map.
Everybody will go crazy for him for that week, too. And we, I'm sure, on a podcast, will probably kick ourselves for not picking him up, and then he'll fade back into the abyss, and we'll remember why we didn't want that headache anyway. But if you can find that week, and good on you, I guess.
Ghostface Illy.
And no, I wanted to see how far that was going. I wasn't going to speak during the Vince Miracle jam of the pod.
I love that nickname. That's one of the best in the NBA. Ghostface Illy.
That is a good one. I'll give him that. And you know what? He'll fit in relatively well. He's a floor spacer, and there aren't a ton of them on that team right now. So, he'll have some touches. He's again, a little bit of a specialist type, where he's a big man who can step out and hit the three. He's a big man that gets more steals than blocks on the whole. He doesn't turn the ball over very much. But it's going to be...
Led the league in charges last year.
That's right. But that, unfortunately, for most fantasy teams, doesn't mean a whole lot. Just hope it earns him a few extra minutes. And, if you're okay with riding that wild up and down that is an Ersan Ilyasova season, then I guess you could grab him in the late rounds, too, and hope that he or one of the other guys pans out. And that, to me, is the Oklahoma roundup right now. I'm more interested, Vince, in a couple of these other teams, and I want to kind of build up to them with what I would call the other team that, and this is an unfair way to describe them. It's a wholly inaccurate word to use to call this team uninteresting. But from a fantasy standpoint, it's the one other team in that division that hasn't really seen, well, maybe 1 out of 2, I guess, any real significant changes, and that's maybe the most interesting team from just a pure basketball standpoint, and that's the Minnesota Timberwolves. The names look the same, other than a draft pick or two. So what do you make of this club? We've got Karl-Anthony Towns, who I'm sure most people are targeting as a very, very early pick. The power forward spot, maybe a little bit of a question mark. We'll see how things get deployed there. Andrew Wiggins is going to see most of the small forward minutes. Ricky Rubio now has a couple of guys behind him that he can kind of mentor a little bit at point. And Zach LaVine seemingly will be the shooting guard. So, what's the breakdown on this team, Vince? There haven't been many changes.
They have a lot of fun fantasy players. You have Gorgie Dang. He's a draftable player. Karl-Anthony Towns, draftable player. Rubio, that backcourt, we'll get to that in a second, but Wiggins is going to be a highly touted drafted player. That shooting guard spot is where I have a lot of my questions, because I don't know what they're going to do at the shooting guard spot, because are they going to finally move Zach LaVine in there? Because I think that's where he's best suited, and for some reason they have this idea that he's a point guard, and he just doesn't fit that role. He's a shooter who loves to shoot, and he's very athletic. I think he can be a Kevin Martin type of player, but they don't use him in that way. They want him to be a point guard. So that's where I think that you're going to find a lot of the struggles is in the team's backcourt, and you'll see Wiggins at the 2 at times also. So maybe they throw someone else at the forward spot. They didn't get anyone at the small forward position because it used to be Tyshawn Prince.
Yeah, I'm seeing Wiggins, Shabazz Muhammad, Bielitsa perhaps. I guess Brandon Rush could potentially slide up to that spot, but that's wing guys, I guess.
I think Rush would actually be a good fit there. A guy who can knock down a 3-point shot and then also be, just create more space for a guy like Wiggins whose 3-point shot is still developing. It's still pretty suspect, but he does take quite a bit of mid-range jumpers and likes to drive to the basket. So having a Rush on the floor, I think just think of that lineup of Rubio, Wiggins, Rush, Towns, and Gorgie Dang. That's a fun team to watch. I do think that backcourt, though, especially at the point guard position with Rubio, LaVine, and Dunn, there's a lot of question marks on what that team is going to do there and if Rubio is on the way out. And I think out of the trio of point guards, Rubio is the guy, is the one drawing that short end of the stick, and he's going to be the one that is shipped out because he's been there for so long, and it just seems like it's time for a change. And what you've seen in Summer League is that Dunn looks to be pretty aggressive. How efficient he'll be on the next level is still going to be a question mark, but he put on quite a performance in Summer League. I mean, he was very strong. I know he's dealing with a concussion right now. But he'll be ready for preseason. And I think you just got to watch that backcourt. But again, I really am intrigued to just look at that front court and go, okay, I want Wiggins, I want Karl-Anthony Towns, and I want Gorgie Dang as one of my targeted players when it comes to draft day.
Yeah, that's a fantasy powerhouse of a club, but particularly when you think about they were sort of a zero defense team last year. I do wonder though. The impact of Thibodeau up there, and if that's going to change kind of the mentality of how those games went for the Wolves. Most of their games were played in the 110-point range, and it's pretty easy for starters all playing some 35 to 40 minutes to put up pretty good numbers. So I think this is a team worth reassessing, Vince, when we find out if there are any other moves in the backcourt or the front court. The question marks remain. Cole Aldrich was one of their signings, which, again, we've talked about is sort of an under-the-radar pickup, but between Towns, Jang, Bielitsa, the front court, they're going to need somebody to chew up a few extra minutes up there, and I'd like to talk about the Wolves again with you, Vince, in, let's say, October.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on this Wolves team. Not like they're going to do really well, but I just love the potential. And you brought up their defensive woes. I think now that they have Dang as a starter, they're going to ride with him as their solidified starter now that Pekovic's been dealing with his injuries, and he's just, kind of a guy that's there. I think Dang has shown that he's a rim protector. He can knock down a 3-point shot. He's one of the most fun guys to watch when he plays because you would never think to see that from a guy his size. And then Karl-Anthony Towns is the Rookie of the Year for a reason. He's going to be a superstar in this league. Again, another guy who can play defense, has great lateral quickness, can stay up there with the guards, can knock down a jumper, put his back to the basket, rebound. I mean, both those guys are going to be fun to watch. Then you can add a guy like Cole Aldridge off the bench. I mean, he's going to be a waiver wire guy. I'm not drafting a guy like Cole Aldridge, but he's definitely someone that I'm going to put on my watch list and see, what games can he fill in. Is there games that Dang goes out with injury? Because what Aldridge did in the times that he was filling in for Blake Griffin or DeAndre Jordan for the Clippers last year, definitely you have to have him on your radar. So I'm really intrigued with this Timberwolves team. They might not have made any of the flashiest moves, but I think getting Thibodeau, adding Dunn, and that puts a lot of question marks on, like, is their defense better? What are they going to do with Rubio? And then the added depth of Brandon Rush and Cole Aldridge were, again, not headline changing news, but solid additions to this young team.
Yeah, sliding over to another team that mostly made sort of small additions, if we can even call it that, is the Denver Nuggets. I'm looking at this roster up and down, and the number of changes, this may be the fewest of almost any team in the league. There's very little. They've got presumably Wilson Chandler coming back from injury, and I don't know about anything else that will make an impact on this team. Jamal Murray, I guess, possibly, the young guy, but they've still got the three-headed monster at center in Jokic, Nurkic, and Lavergne. They've got Kenneth Faried at power forward, who they do seem somewhat disenchanted with. Gallinari, Chandler, small forward spot, potentially. I guess you could move Gallo. And then Moutier and likely Gary Harris in the backcourt, and you got Will Barton, who was coming off the bench. So, to me, this feels like a team that's just decided that they're kind of going into growth mode. They like what they got in Michael Malone coaching the team. They like where the young guys were able to improve last year. So my question for you, Vince, is, and I don't know that I have a perfect answer to it yet, who's draftable on the Nuggets and where?
Moutier is draftable in the mid rounds just because he's going to be, having the ball in his hands so much. I'm a huge fan of Gary Harris. Gallinari, again, is draftable. He's going to get you, but when he's healthy, and I'm going to give him that stamp of someone else's headache. I think the same thing goes with Wilson Chandler. I think he's draftable late in rounds, but gets that stamp of someone else's headache. But that carousel at that power forward center position with Laverne, you just listed them off. I'm not going to butcher their names. But I'm a huge fan of Jokic and Nurkic. But it's just like, where do you want to draft them? Who do you think is going to get the minutes? It's so up and down. But I think you can look at, I think there's 4 really good players on this team that you can look at with Moutier, Harris, Chandler, and Gallinari, where you're like, okay, those are the 4 draftable guys. Even Kenneth Faried, I think they're going to showcase him and trade him away.
Yeah, that may be the route to go, and you could even potentially think about grabbing him and then trying to get rid of him before any possible move away from Denver. I've had Gallinari a couple of times in fantasy leagues. He's unfortunately heavily injury prone, but when he's healthy, he's an extremely unique talent. But overall, on this Denver team, while I do believe that there are some serious possible values on it, I'm not a huge fan of digging into it and using up an early or mid pick on any of these guys. I think that there's a lot of question marks. Gary Harris might be your safest bet on this team, believe it or not, right now. He was so good for them down the stretch.
I'm a huge fan of Gary Harris.
Excellent shooter, good defender. But outside of him, I don't know that anybody's minutes are fully locked up on that team. And with that in mind, I don't know if I can really give a strong recommendation to any of the other guys. But we will, of course, reassess all of these teams as we get a bit closer to the season. That's where I sit right now on the Denver side. Vince, I want to turn our attention to me, the 2 more interesting teams in the Northwest, outside, of course, of the Thunder and all the changes going on there. But we didn't spend too much time on it today because we have already in the past on this show. Portland and Utah. Utah brought in some names. Portland brought in some names. And the Blazers were kind of an upstart team last year. Nobody really expected them to be as good as they were. They retained Alan Crabb. They brought in Evan Turner. They brought in Festus Ezeli. They retained Myers Leonard for reasons largely unknown. And then, of course, C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard still there. And those are the guys that they're kind of the engine on this team. Portland has always needed a little bit more depth, and it seems like they got it. But that also feels to me, Vince, like it takes away from anybody not the starting point guard or starting shooting guard? Don't you kind of have to scale back what you can expect from guys like Al-Farouq Aminu and Evan Turner and Mason Plumlee with guys coming in that also play their positions?
Yeah, unless you're Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum, I mean, you're late round to me. I mean, for Aminu was so good,
Yeah.
but they added depth there. Mason Plumlee was played really well also, but now they added Festus Ezeli, like you said, and I think they did that because they want Plumlee to kind of move to that power forward spot, and that's what I'm kind of reading from that ad, because Ezeli I think is one of those players that a lot of NBA teams are looking at as a potentially like good starting center, and he has the ability to. I mean, he's very energetic. It's just that hook that he loves to do so much.
Oh, that hook.
Get away from. But yeah, I think you're right. Or you're looking at those players, and you have to kind of look at them with like squinted eyes, because you really don't know what you're gonna get. You know that they're gonna be on the floor, but what are they going to be able to produce now that there's so much depth behind them? Like a guy like Evan Turner, who was so good for the Celtics last year, I don't think you can expect those same numbers. But at the same time, they paid him.
Yeah, so he'll be out there. He'll be out there to some degree, but he's not going to be the orchestrator of the offense, the point forward spot. I mean, you've got a couple of other ball handlers outside, I guess, perhaps of when he's out there, and the other ball handlers are not. So. Yeah, I agree with you, Vince. I think there's a certain measure of suspicion where this Portland team, from a pure basketball standpoint, got better. I like the moves that they made. I think that this is a team that's growing. Their young guys are getting better. They were able to bring in some nice pieces to kind of complement it. But depth does make it tougher from a fantasy perspective. So I think I'd lean back towards the starting backcourt on this team. They're the obvious choices. Of the other guys, Evan Turner, Al-Farouq Aminu are sort of your two closest fits for me, but I'm putting them in someone else's headache right now.
I really like Al-Farouq Aminu for what he did, but he still is a questionable shooter. He grabs some rebounds, he steals, he blocks, but again, they added so much depth behind him now that they're going to be looked at differently because of how well they played in the playoffs and the fact that they made the playoffs. Again, that start to the season, although it always gets overlooked as like, oh, it doesn't matter how you start the season, how about how you finish. But they started the season pretty strong when the West was really struggling, and I think Aminu was a big part of it. But now they added so much depth behind him. If basically they have it to where if any one player starts to have a bad night, they have someone they can insert in, and hopefully they can revamp that offense or revamp that defense, and that's going to cause them to have less fantasy value, like we've been saying about this team.
All right, the last one on this Northwest tour we're taking today, and this one to me is jam-packed with question marks too, and that's the Utah Jazz, who also...
My favorite team, though.
But yeah, I was going to say they're also very interesting, but Rudy Gobert, who should be healthy this coming year, Derek Favors, pretty well locked in, Gordon Hayward, pretty well locked in, and then you get to everybody else. The shooting guard position right now is sort of a mishmash of the surging Rodney Hood, the returning from injury Alec Burks, possibly Joe Johnson, who they brought in, although he could certainly play the small forward spot as well. Joe Ingles is kind of mixed in there with that mess. Boris Diaw is a possible spot on the wing, although he could, of course, slide forward to play power forward or center. And the point guard spot. George Hill, Dante Exum, Shelvin Mack, they're all still there. Are we looking at a massive timeshare in the backcourt?
Yeah, no, I think they're gonna slowly bring back Dante Exum. I think they're gonna still have Alec Burks as like that point / shooting guard type of player. I don't know. I mean, you just listed off that team, and it's just like there really is no problems with, like they have no holes on that team.
Yeah, I think the only player I didn't say was Trey Lyles.
Who was a summer league stud.
Yeah, so that's your whole roster.
Amazing through summer league. People were like, "Oh man, he's going to be just fantastic when he gets into this." I think he's going to have a better year. Fantasy worthy, I don't think so. I just don't think he's going to get the minutes to be fantasy worthy. But what they did is they really just now they have a solid, a solid starting five and a solid bench. Like no matter where you turn, there's someone there that they can insert in and either, like we were just talking about the Blazers, revamp that offense, rejuvenate that defense. I mean, they can bring someone in automatically. And they also brought that veteran leadership with Boris Diaw, who can now be on the floor with Trey Lyles and get him off the block or get him on the block or even, swap that back and forth. I think they're almost one of the same type of players with him and Diaw. If you guys hear a little bit of noise, it's my daughter in the background. My daughter is here with me.
the little miracle.
A little miracle. But I keep looking at this team, and I think Rodney Hood is still one of my favorite players from last year.
That was, by the way, Vince, that was going to be my question to you. And I know that there's a lot of subtleties to this that you can't convey in a binary response, but with all of this going on, do you still trust Rodney Hood?
Do I still trust? Yeah, I do. Just because I don't think last year was a fluke. I think he showed that. He's a very versatile offensive weapon. He can do it off the dribble. He can do it as a spot up shooter. He's not afraid to drive to the basket. He's not afraid to get to the free throw line. He stayed relatively healthy last season. I know he had I believe an ankle thing and a shoulder thing last season. But again, Alec Burks is a questionable injury guy. He's been dealing with injuries over the past few seasons. I just don't think they're going to move away from something that was just so promising. I just think that. If you're gonna pick him, let's say, you might want to pick him a round or two later than what you were already planning on doing. So
I wouldn't touch the point guard spot on that team.
No.
And I think you do have to drop Rudy Gobert back a little bit. He showed this year that there was some slight regression. Maybe he is able to push forward if he gets fully healthy again, but a little bit of a drop off there. Derek Favors was awesome last year. He missed some time, but boy, when he was out there, what a force, fantasy and otherwise. So a lot of interesting options on that Utah team. I was really curious about your thoughts on the shooting guard spot. I find that little logjam there kind of interesting, and it did seem like Rodney Hood kind of rose to the top last year, and they're gonna have some questions. They're gonna have to figure out how to work Joe Johnson into the mix. I think
the thing about Joe Johnson though is he can play the 2 and the 3, and because of his size and the way he plays, being able to post players, I think it would not surprise me. And I don't think they'll do it much, but it would not surprise me if they try to stretch 4 look with him.
That would be, I mean, he's a big boy now at the end of his career. He's thicker than he was when he started. And then of course Boris Diaw, he'll fit in almost anywhere. If he's a Swiss Army knife. He has the biggest butt in the NBA, and and he knows how to throw it around. He's so smart that I don't foresee him being sort of a chemistry issue in any way. So that's your interesting look, by the way, at the Northwest Division. We'll break things down by rounds as we approach the draft. I know, Vince, you were telling me before we went on, and I think it's worth repeating that you and the writers over at Hoopball are grinding away already on a draft guide. And, of course, Aaron Brewski, the Brewski Top 150 is always something that everybody waits for. So what can we know about that right now?
It's in progress. We're going to have something awesome for you coming really soon. So be on the lookout for tweets and information that we're giving out. That'll probably be on this show, probably be on the Cause and Brew show. We're really starting to ramp up and buckle down and getting ready for not just preseason, but the entire regular season and your guys' fantasy season. So when draft day comes, you know who to pick and you know who you want on your team.
Hoop-ball.com is what you should pick, and then everything else will fall right into place. He is Vince Miracle. I am Dan Bespris. At Dan Bespris on Twitter. He is at VM Center on the Twitter universe. Hoopball Tweets is the handle for our host website, hoop-ball.com. Check it out right now. Vince will have these podcasts available in new locations as well. I know that's something that you're working on behind the scenes with Aaron to make sure that more folks can listen in, and be sure to share it, tell your friends, and tweet at us. Let us know your thoughts as we work our way through this NBA offseason. Final thoughts, buddy.
Be sure to join the conversation by using hashtag FantasyNBAPod on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, everything like that. He already gave out my Twitter handle at VM Center. And then Do us a huge favor, guys, because if you can't listen to this on iTunes and if you can't listen to it on any of our websites, guess what? We are now in an app, and that app is called YouTube. Look up Hoop Ball on YouTube. That is our channel. You'll see the logo there, and all of our podcasts will start going up there, and we're also going to be having upcoming shows later on in the future, so definitely start subscribing now. Become a what's it called? A founding subscriber.
I'm not only a member of the Hair Club for Men, I'm also the president.
There you go.
I have a secret to tell you, Vince.
Oh no.
I caught a Squirtle.
He's playing Pokemon.
I had to, and this is my final thought before we sign this thing off. We're doing a Pokemon promotion at the baseball stadium, so I'm doing it for research, and
there you go.
Dude, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
It's the easiest game to get addicted to, though. You have to admit that.
When I learned that I had to walk 5 miles to hatch an egg, that was the end of it for me. I'm done. I'm throwing my cards on the table. I'm out. And so are we. The podcast comes to its conclusion.
What a way to end
that was dude,
awesome.
I'm putting a crown on my head that says King of Segways on it.
Oh, that was amazing.
We'll be back with you later this week for edition number 2 of this week. Fantasy NBA Today is the podcast. He's Vince. I'm Dan. Have a wonderful couple of days, and we'll break down the final division in the Western Conference on our next program. So long, everybody.
Catch 'em all.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.